We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com.
Welcome to another edition of AV Rant. My name is Rob H. I'm your host this week while Tom Andrew is away, and this week I'm joined by a very special guest co-host. He's making his first appearance here on AV Rant, and that is our good friend Richard Gunther from the Digital Media Zone, host of the Home On podcast. Hello, Richard.
Hello. How are you?
Doing very well, and thank you so much for joining me. I've wanted to have you on this podcast. We are long overdue. I've appeared on Entertainment 2.0, which, by the way, folks, is another podcast that Richard co-hosts. And so, yeah, it's long overdue for the reciprocal appearance here on AV Rant. So thank you very much for being here.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it. If I remember correctly, I think this is kind of my compensation for not getting to talk on my own podcast when you were the guest.
Yeah, that's kind of the truth, that whenever I've shown up there, either you've been away, so that's not my fault for you not talking on those instances. That is true. But yeah, I think have we only been on that podcast together once, or is it twice now? Twice now.
I think it's been twice.
It's been twice now. The first time I definitely did not let you get a word in edgewise, so that was not necessarily good guesting on my part, but we covered a lot of info there, and we are going to cover a heck of a lot of info here today. Our listeners here at AVRant have responded tremendously, as they always do, and we've got a pile of home automation questions since I billed Richard as being a home automation expert, and he most certainly is. So that's going to be a lot of fun. And to get to that, I'm going to let everybody know this is AVRant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. And this week, in particular, also some home automation, DIY home automation questions answered. And to get your questions answered, all you have to do is ask. You do that by sending your questions via email to question@avrant.com. That is our email address. That is by far the best place to send your questions, so please use that email address. You can, however, get in touch with us on Facebook. That's facebook.com/avrantpodcast. You can also reach us on our website, of course, which is avrant.com. You can leave a comment there. And you can reach me individually. I'm rob@avrant.com. You can find me on Twitter @FirstReflect. And Tom, our regular host here at AVRant, he's @AVRant_Tom on Twitter. You can reach him individually via email if you want to, tom@avrant.com. And folks can also reach Richard if they'd like to. Is that correct?
They can. They can reach me actually at richard@thedigitalmediazone.com or on Twitter @RichardGunther.
And if you're watching the YouTube video, this is my second week trying to stream via OBS because we have to. Google Hangouts is going away, so I've been given essentially no choice. I have tried to put a lower third, including Richard's Twitter address, so hopefully that works. I don't know. I don't really know what I'm doing, but making the best of the situation if I can. So, yeah, before we get into the podcast proper here, we want to make sure we thank our listeners of the week, who are people who have supported AVRant in some way. Now, one way to support us is via PayPal. If you come to avrant.com, over on the right-hand side, it says Support AVRant. That'll take you to PayPal, where you can use your PayPal account or just a credit card if you don't want to sign up for a PayPal account. I don't know if people have donated on PayPal because Tom is the only person who sees those donations, so it's entirely possible people have, and everybody whose name we haven't mentioned last week and this week, you absolutely will be mentioned when Tom is back next week. So thank you so much for the support there. Also over at patreon.com/AVRantPodcast, you can sign up for an automatic monthly donation to this podcast if you would like to, and we have 83 patrons over there, so we want to say thanks very much to everyone who is supporting this podcast financially. So let's see here. Let's dig right in and introduce our guest co-host for this week, Richard Gunther. Let's tell the AVRant folks, if they aren't familiar with you already, what you're all about. Who are you?
Yeah, sure. So I'm pretty much a tech geek that writes and talks about home automation and digital entertainment technology. And I write over at the Digital Media Zone. That is, unfortunately, thedigitalmediazone.com. And I say unfortunately because really, seriously, what URLs have the in it? But, you know, that's what sets us apart. And over there, you'll find our thoughts on different digital media technologies. We're big. Really, we kind of started out in the whole DIY home theater PC space. And that kind of has evolved into broader digital entertainment. And now I have a personal interest in home automation, so we've brought that into the fray as well. And as a part of that, I also host some podcasts. Now, you mentioned Entertainment 2.0, which you've been on in the past. Mm-hmm. That's our show that talks about digital entertainment technology. That used to be a show exclusively about Windows Media Center.
Right. And then it expanded to everything Microsoft.
Yeah, anything having to do with entertainment in the Microsoft ecosystem. Mm-hmm. And then even that started dwindling. So we expanded even further to the broader digital entertainment space. And I think, we still have a really good audience. And there's still so much to talk about there that we're really enjoying that. And Josh and I have been doing that together for, about 7 or more years now. So the show itself is coming up, I think, on its somewhere between the 10th and 11th, but it'll soon be at its 500th episode.
Yeah, that's always a really fun milestone to reach. We had a fun celebration here at AVRant when we reached episode 500, so that's really cool, and congratulations on that, because as both of us know full well, not every podcast makes it to 500 episodes, especially when it is weekly instead of daily. If it's daily, maybe you get there, but weekly, not always. So congratulations.
Indeed. Yeah, thank you. We're very excited about that. And then Home On is my show about DIY home automation. And on that, we invite different guests from the industry and talk with them about what's going on in that space or their products. Or sometimes we have founders from companies. Sometimes we have journalists. It's a good mix of people. And then finally, the Smart Home Show is a show that I just took over with my friend Adam Justice. This was Mike Wolf's industry perspective on smart home. And as luck would have it, Adam works in this space. He owns a company and runs a company that is in the smart home space. And I look at things from the consumer's perspective. So we bring those different perspectives to the show, and I think we're having a pretty good run with that so far. We're just about 6 or 7 episodes into our turn at that brand.
That is fantastic. Yeah, it's really awesome you got to be able to take over that, continue that show, because whenever there's one host who's transitioning and perhaps leaving the show, it's always questionable. The audience always worries that, is their favorite show going to continue on? So I'm more than certain that everyone is very glad that you've come on board and taking over the reins on that and keeping it going. So that's really good. Correct me if I'm wrong, but were you not also host or co-host of a Game of Thrones podcast as well?
Oh, yeah. So absolutely. I have some friends who are big into Game of Thrones, and they wanted to have a show that, again, brought different perspectives in. I'd never seen it before.
Oh, okay.
And in anticipation of the final season, we watched all of the preceding episodes.
Nice.
And one of the guys has seen it multiple times and read the books, but really looks at it kind of from the perspective of, I guess, a production view and how it's implemented. Like how well did they do at translating the book to the story on film? And then my other co-host, Jenny Josephson, has read the books and she kind of brought this perspective of, okay, I'm intimately familiar with these stories. So that's her perspective. And then I was the newbie and I was lost the entire time. But if you're interested in catching that, the archives are, the show is called Let's Talk About Thrones. All of our episodes are out there. And it's just kind of one of the growing series of Let's Talk About shows that Jenny does.
That's awesome. Well, folks, if you like Richard Gunther, you have opportunity to hear more of his voice if you haven't already been listening to any of his shows. So Entertainment 2.0, Home On, The Smart Home Show, and Let's Talk About Thrones. You can find more of Richard, and you can find him here on this episode. So It's our tradition here at AVRant. We always do this whenever somebody new is appearing on our show. We have to ask you what is in your own personal home theater because people want to know. They want to know what is this person actually experiencing on a day-to-day basis when they're watching their home theater.
Well, it's funny. My home theater has been curiously influenced by someone I know named Rob.
Oh, yeah.
He's kind of my go-to guy when I need to know what equipment I should consider or not. So as it happens, with your guidance, I have a number of different things. Obviously I have components and things like that. And of course, as an old world home theater guy, it just drives me crazy that the thing now is that everyone creates their own unique box form that you have to figure out how to jam into a cabinet together, unlike the old days when it all stacked nicely. But nonetheless, I have the LG B6 LED OLEDs from, I think, 2016.
It would be, yeah. They actually
correctly.
lined up the end numbers there with the year it came out, so that made it easier to track LG's. What size screen of B6 OLED is that?
It is sadly only the 55 because the space that I have will only accommodate a 55-inch screen.
Also, at that time, the prices were still higher. They've crept down a little bit, not maybe quite as much as everyone would like, but OLEDs in 2016 were still an expensive proposition.
Oh, absolutely. And, what's funny is that this screen doesn't fit in the entertainment center that I have built into the home. So I actually had to hire a contractor to create a structure inside the TV box area that was like an artificial back panel that has an extended mount that floats the TV in front of the entertainment center.
Nice. So would have been good with like a 40-incher. What kind of audio system are you running there with that OLED?
So I have the Pioneer SCLX 701. Again, that was a recommendation from you looking at a bunch of different things. That was really the most money that I was willing to spend. Sure. And on sale, I think that ended up running about $1,600. It essentially gives you 9.1 configured however you want that, either in different zones or in Atmos. And I have it set up as 712.
Okay.
I have for my front speakers, again, another recommendation from you, the KEF 3.0 front soundbar. This was a really tricky proposition because I didn't want front speakers. I got into all kinds of contentious discussion with my partner about where speakers should and shouldn't be in the family room. And we ultimately concluded that something that was a little bit less visible would be a better solution.
And just to clarify, that's Kev's HTF 8003, which, they call it a soundbar on their own website, but it's not your traditional soundbar where it's self-powered. It's essentially three passive speakers that happen to share one long cabinet. And then
in one case.
Yeah,
exactly.
You still power it with a traditional AV receiver, just like any other regular three front speakers.
Yep. Exactly. And that floats right below my floating TV.
Nice.
And then I have a Dynamo sub that I've had for years, and I love the thing. It's done a really good job for me over the years. And that kind of ends the higher, well, not even high end, but like what I would qualify as the mid-tier components that I have. And everything else is kind of budget. I have decent Yamaha ceiling speakers, 2 of those.
And for Atmos duty, that's absolutely fine, I'm sure.
Yeah, it does a fine job. And then probably the least impressive parts of my setup are my side and rear speakers, which are simply Bose. I believe they're considered Bose wall speakers. They're not the shelf speakers, but you would normally mount them on the wall. They're not that great, but they do a good enough job. And at some point in time, I do want to replace those.
Well, that's I mean, we are big fans of you focus on the most important parts first. We talk about that frequently when people are asking how best to distribute their budget. So you followed the advice that I gave. So of course I'm going to say that that's great. And so thank you very much for introducing that system. And without further ado, we are going to dig into these home automation questions because we have quite a few of them. Now, I've sprinkled in a couple of sort of overarching ideas in here because these are sort of things I wanted to ask about myself. So why can't I ask podcast questions on my own podcast? That seems fair enough. I rarely get to do so. So
sure thing.
Right off the bat, I'm going to start with, how would you, Richard, describe the current state of DIY home automation? Because I'm thinking way back to when X10 was the first thing that anybody would mention, and then right after that, it seemed like you went to Insteon. That seemed to be the go-to for a number of years. Then we started hearing about Zigbee and Z-Wave, and then I started seeing actual stores putting displays or even entire sections in there. We had like Iris from Lowe's or Staples Connect, and then certainly in more recent times, it's like the massive tech companies, your Apple, Amazon, Google, Samsung. They've entered in. We've got all their voice assistants that seem to be what have sparked a lot of DIY home automation in recent years. So where do we stand now? Do we still have like a mishmash of incompatible brands and incompatible standards that people have to worry about? And if that's the case, could you just pick one brand and go like, yep, that's going to be my brand, and I know no matter which of these big brands I pick, they're going to have everything I want? Can we feel that confident yet?
Geez, I don't know why, but for some reason I'm having flashbacks of being in a hearing, being questioned by a bunch of people. So, yeah, I mean, the reality is that it's kind of a mess right now. And as you mentioned, we have Apple, Amazon, Google, to some extent Samsung. At one point, Microsoft was believed that they would be a player, but they're clearly not anymore. And these companies are kind of taking over and filling in where, frankly, the industry failed. The industry failed to consolidate and standardize in a way that would make everything work together.
Right.
So what Apple, Amazon, and Google have done is they've created what I would consider like umbrella technology that can then reach out to all these companies' things and try to control them. Now, it's not consistent. These are, to some extent, intersecting fields, and they don't play nicely with each other. And the classic example of that is that the Nest thermostat is probably never going to work with Apple's HomeKit.
Okay.
And that is just a horrible shame because here are some great technologies that would work wonderfully together, but because you have competing companies that are trying to stake their claim, you're not necessarily going to get the cooperation that we need for one ecosystem.
And while I'm sure there are thermostats that work with HomeKit, they're not necessarily going to be as nice or feature-rich as the Nest ones that an end user might want to incorporate. So they do have to still be cognizant of the fact that you can't at this point just willy-nilly buy whatever you want and get it home and be like, yeah, for sure it's going to work with what I already have. You still have to do some pre-planning, yeah?
Well, right. That's exactly right. And so my recommendation to pretty much everybody is that when you buy products, unless there's a really good reason or you're just hell-bent on specifically buying, again, I'll use the example of that Nest, even though you know it won't work with everything, then try to buy products that have the badges on them of the three major players, of Google, of Amazon, and of HomeKit. And maybe if you care about doing more advanced things, also something like SmartThings and IFTTT.
Okay. Well, that's the state now. As we know, things always keep evolving, but I want to make sure I dig into the questions that people did send specifically about home automation. So we're sticking, I've done a little bit of, usually on this podcast, we just do first in, first out. That's how we answer questions, but I've done a little bit of editorializing to try and keep somewhat similar topics together. I think that makes things a little bit more manageable. Now we're going to start with our good friend Infinite Gary, because what is an AVRant show without a question from Infinite Gary? So Gary doesn't have any home automation at the moment, which might be shocking because we know how many products Gary does have in his home, but no home automation. He feels quite satisfied, though, that anything he wants or needs to do in his home, he can already accomplish it. He can manually flip a switch, he can press a button somewhere, and he doesn't really feel a need himself for home automation. So he wants to know, is it strictly a want? It's just perhaps a nice thing to delve into, or is there genuinely a need for home automation?
Yeah, you're going to hear this answer from me a lot.
Okay.
It depends.
Yeah.
So I tend to believe that if you're interested in home automation, or you're wondering if home automation makes sense for you, and you don't have that drive to adopt it because, you just, it's interesting enough that you want to invest in it, then you have to think about, are there areas where automation could solve a problem for you, or maybe save you some money? And so I'll give you some examples. One of the things that we hear all the time is, my kids leave the lights on in the bathroom.
Sure.
Constantly.
Yeah.
They never remember to turn it off. All right, well, there's an easy solution to that. Maybe get a motion sensor. That's not even really automation. It's just thinking about getting a product that can help solve that problem for you.
Right.
Or if you leave the garage door open, or maybe your spouse or partner ends up leaving the garage door open every once in a while, and that's something that you're concerned about, well, there are products out there like the Chamberlain MyQ, which you can pretty much install in about 15 minutes. Doesn't require you to have anything else set up in your home from an automation perspective, and will directly communicate the same way that the buttons in your car can also control your garage door opener to open and close the door. And you can set that up so it would alert you. And this is actually one of my favorite things. I have an alert if my door is open for more than an hour.
Right.
Because that's probably a mistake.
Well, that's good. So think of it in terms of problem solving, if it's not just something that's inherently interesting to you, because as we've discussed, there is some pre-planning that needs to go. If you're talking about automating your whole house yourself, then it's definitely going to be a project. This isn't something that's just going to be super easy and no thought put into it. So if that isn't what you want to do, for some people, that's exactly what they want. They're looking for that project. That totally makes sense.
Right.
But if that isn't you, and you're really like, I'm into tech, so I almost feel like I should be into home automation, but I don't have a pressing desire for it, and I don't really want that project, then if you're thinking of it in terms of problem solving, that makes a lot of sense. So another question from Monty N. Monty would like to hear some examples that would convince somebody that home automation is worth the investment of the time and money. So it is that sort of like, I kind of feel like I should be. Now convince me that I really want to be. And then he would also like to know which system or brand or ecosystem, however we want to describe it, that Richard himself would recommend for someone who considers themselves a beginner.
Yeah, the latter part is a little bit more complicated, but let's address the money question. So I think where most people see the most impact in their budget is in the investment in a smart thermostat.
Okay.
So something that will help you control the HVAC, or maybe even ceiling fans in your home, to reduce the amount that you're spending in energy costs through your home. In some cases, people install thermostats and save hundreds of dollars a year in their homes. And you might ask, well, how is that possible? I mean, I go through and I set my thermostat back every night, and I make sure that it goes back to the regular temperature during the day, and we turn it down or whatever is appropriate when we leave. Not everybody's all that good about that, and you may not always make the adjustments that are as efficient as they could be for the equipment that you have. And a lot of these thermostats that are available now are designed to be used as efficiently as possible. And as an example, again, I'll use the Nest. The Nest has this great setting where it figures out how long after the air conditioning has been on is the ductwork actually still cold enough that we can push air through it and not have to still have the compressor on and be cooling the home.
Just a fan.
Right. So things like that really help you save money. So that's something to consider. The other thing to think about is where you could get the most potential savings in great need. And the best example that I could have for that is leak sensors.
Okay.
one of the most expensive recovery efforts for many homeowners, and that probably most homeowners have faced at one point in time or another, is a water leak.
Sure.
It does tremendous damage. Insurance companies hate them, and you end up losing stuff.
Yeah.
Sure, maybe you recover in money, but you lose stuff, and nobody wants to go through that hassle. By installing some basic system that provides you with notifications when water is detected where it shouldn't be, whether it's under a sink or probably more importantly in a basement or near a sump pump or something like that, that can potentially save you thousands and thousands of dollars and lost belongings.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's a really good use case for this. And then finally, and this isn't automation at all, I think just nowadays this is kind of good sense. If you haven't done it already, get rid of your incandescent bulbs.
Right.
I mean, if you don't necessarily want to throw them out because, they're a relic that you want to cherish and save, I literally have bins of these that I am not throwing away because I want to have them. But I've replaced all my incandescent bulbs with LED bulbs. And it's cheap enough now that you can pretty much get a dimmable LED bulb for $2 or $3 at your local big box home store. So you will save a notable amount of energy every year on that alone.
Well, is there a ecosystem or brand or system that you would recommend to a beginner? I mean, this is one of those pre-planning things. So can you just say, here's one where likelihood is, as a beginner, you'll have a good time adding more components to this system?
Remember the word I said I was going to use?
Yup.
Depends.
Yup.
So it depends. I would say if you are an Apple user and you are knee deep and you're not going to be diverting from the Apple ecosystem, I have a lot of faith in what Apple is doing with HomeKit. I think HomeKit is probably the easiest, the most user-friendly, and one of the most robust systems that is available. And iOS 13 is even going to make that better. So I firmly recommend HomeKit to people who are in the Apple ecosystem. Otherwise, my recommendation would be buy products that you like, that you want, but decide whether you want to use either Google Home or Amazon's Assistant as your means of controlling this stuff.
Okay.
Most products are going to work with both. Not all, but most will. So you don't have to say just be all in one ecosystem.
Right.
But and that's the good thing about players like Google and Apple and Amazon getting into this game.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, because most people will sort of have a leaning towards probably one of those three giant companies in some fashion, and that probably will help distill it down. So that's really good. Well, we'll move on to another question here, sticking with the somewhat, intro to getting into this stuff in the beginning. That's going to be a question from John B. John has a Philips Hue hub already, or he calls it a hub. I know you've got a contention with that term, but a Philips Hue hub, a SmartThings hub, that's from Samsung, SmartThings, and a Harmony hub. So that's the Harmony remote system with their hub-based system. So he's feeling already with those three items like he has hub fatigue, which is a phrase that sometimes gets thrown around the DIY home automation community. So is there one hub to rule them all?
No. No, there really isn't. And, this is an unfortunate circumstance. The reality is that some of the most efficient technology to control devices in your home and allow them to mesh together doesn't talk to Wi-Fi.
Okay.
So any product that you buy or any family of products that you buy that then needs to somehow be connected to your Wi-Fi is going to need to be connected to it all with a hub. Now, SmartThings comes pretty close. They have a whole bunch of radios in that, and they're continually improving the devices that it can support. 4 years ago, I would have said that Staples is your answer. Staples really had the best, most comprehensive product out there with the most number of radios in it. But they gave up on it. They didn't have the appetite to actually drive that product forward. And this is the problem with committing to any one hub,
Right.
is that you don't know how long it's going to be around. And I've heard lots of stories of people having to re-provision all of their devices. Oh, I had to reset everything.
Yeah.
And, when this company died, when Revolve died, and I had to then connect it all to SmartThings.
Yeah.
Well, who knows how long SmartThings is going to be around? I'm not, I don't know anything.
Yeah.
They're not. But
there's no guarantee.
There's always that risk, right?
Well, I mean, I think isn't that the trepidation, though, of someone who is questioning? They might have an interest in it, but they're questioning getting into DIY home automation. Isn't that the justification for saying, I don't know if I want to jump into it with both feet just yet, because there is still uncertainty?
Yeah, sure. That is a fair statement, but that is why I recommend to buy devices that kind of work with everything now.
No, that makes sense.
If you're putting out a plug that works with Amazon, and it works with Google, and it works with Apple, and some new big player comes along to take over one of those, in all likelihood, you're going to support that too.
Right.
So I think people need to not worry about that so much. The other thing I think people need to not worry about is these bridge devices that exist to connect to Wi-Fi. And that's the example that I was giving with the Hue bridge. That's not really a hub. All it does is connect the Zigbee bulbs and other devices that can communicate with Hue to your Wi-Fi, and you're going to have a bunch of them. There's just no way around it.
Well, there you go. I mean, it's at the moment, that is the situation. So we cannot say there is a simpler solution of one box, and that's going to cover everything.
Right.
So let's get our last question that we're filing under our sort of beginners section here, and that's from Tate L. Tate also has a Philips Hue light system, but he also has an alarm system from alarm.com, and that alarm.com system runs on Z-Wave. So he's wondering, is there a way he can integrate the Philips Hue lights so that his lights respond along with his alarm system that's based on Z-Wave if the alarm ever goes off?
Well, let me tell you about what I did with my alarm.com system that my provider had no clue about. Like, alarm.com is exclusively Z-Wave and some IP controlled stuff. Alarm.com likes to own anything that it controls.
Okay.
So the ability to control something from another app and use alarm.com is very, very limited. But there are devices you can buy that would allow you to hack something together.
Okay.
So what I'm going to suggest is not sanctioned by anybody, but it will likely work if all you're really trying to do is trigger those lights.
Okay.
It's not going to give you the ability to control them from your alarm panel or anything like that.
Okay.
But you will be able to set up a rule that would turn them on. And it's pretty much this simple. Have a Z-Wave plug module, a Z-Wave outlet added to your alarm.com system.
Okay.
And then set up a rule in alarm.com that gets turned on when the alarm is triggered.
Okay.
All right. Then you could have some device that is SmartThings controlled.
Okay.
Piggybacked on top of that. In other words, plugged into that module.
Into that Z-Wave outlet now.
And then you could use SmartThings. So notice, I'm now saying this is an investment. Now you've bought a Z-Wave module, something for SmartThings, and a SmartThings hub to pull all of this off. But then you could use SmartThings to have a rule that when this thing comes online, then control my Hue lights.
Okay. I mean, Hue lights are one of those things that work with just about every system out there. So
yeah, except that these large alarm systems are really slow to adopt what you and I would probably consider some of the most common and popular smart home products.
Okay. Well, at least there's a hack, and might not find that information just askingalarm.com. So we're going to move on to a whole new section now. This is a little bit more geared towards home theater. So this is a little bit of my own experience. Again, I'm sort of asking this question. We've got, in the home theater world, more familiarity with the professionally installed systems, Crestron, AMX, Control 4, Savant. Those do require professional installation, though. And naturally, for the type of people who listen to this podcast and listen to Home On, we want to be able to adjust our own settings. We want to be able to expand our own system. We want to be able to purchase products, add it to our system ourselves. And there's sort of this divide in these quote-unquote professional systems versus the quote-unquote DIY automation systems, and they don't really seem to go together, that mesh that well together. So is it like all or nothing? Can they be blended together? And is there a way for a homeowner to just install everything themselves and end up with a system that's just as slick and just as integrated as, say, Crestron?
This is a complicated question. So of the major players in the install space, Crestron, AMS, Control 4, Savant, Control 4 is probably closest to allowing homeowners to tinker. They don't allow you to add your own devices yet. They may at some point in the future. They haven't said that they will, but this is something that I press them on constantly.
Right.
Because Control 4 has probably done the best job of acknowledging that while they're a turnkey solution, they also have customers who don't want to have to call up their installer every time they want to make a change.
I mean, including that would include adding like one more Philips Hue bulb. Is that the case?
Yes.
Okay.
But what they have done is that they currently have this engine they call when then. It's their name for if this then that. And that when then engine allows the homeowners to create their own rules for stuff. So this is kind of unprecedented in the installer space because installers like to have control over everything so they know it'll work and they don't have to worry about anything. And so Control 4 invested a lot of money in ensuring that this engine was going to be bulletproof. And they have a way of allowing the installers to kind of monitor and get notified of any problems that might result from it. So that's probably the closest you're going to get to something that is going to blend that together.
All right.
Now, you could use these hobbyist type of solutions that exist out there. There are numerous ones. The first one that comes to mind is the ISY from Universal Devices, which is a combination Z-Wave and Insteon controller that has just significant amount of control that you can establish through scripting. But it takes a lot of time and not a lot of knowledge, oftentimes an understanding of coding, and a fair amount of money. Now, it's going to be cheaper than having an installer do it, for sure.
But definitely not plug and play. There's an investment of time on your part to do this.
Exactly. Exactly.
All right. Well, some questions from our AVRant listeners along these lines, more along integrating home automation and home theater. Karl R and his wife Elizabeth, they currently use Apple HomeKit, and they control their Lennox HVAC system with that and their Philips Hue lights. In case anyone's wondering, Philips Hue lights are pretty popular. They also have a Nest security system, and he says they're patiently waiting for that to be made HomeKit compatible. So, obviously wants to stick with HomeKit. They also have Sonos throughout their whole house. They got pairs of Sonos 5 Generation 2 speakers in 5 different rooms in their house. And then in their theater, they've got a JVC projector. They've got a motorized Stewart screen that also has motorized masking on it. And they've got a Denon X7200WA plus an external 2-channel amp, so a full Atmos system going. And then they've also got an Oppo 203, an Apple TV 4K, and DirecTV throughout the house using the DirecTV Genie DVR and then the Genie 4K minis to feed the different TVs. So every item, of course, comes with its own separate remote or app.
Of course.
Right? And they haven't combined all of that. They haven't integrated all of that, and his wife in particular is sick of it, and she's saying she's willing to hire a professional to come install one of these professional systems that will bring it all together, make it easy to use the theater with one remote. You don't have to go digging around a bunch of different remotes that you lose in the couch cushions, and one single interface, not a bunch of different apps that you have to pull up individually, but one single interface to control everything else in the house, the whole house audio, their alarm system, everything. They want to integrate it all. So Karl would potentially like to save money and do it all himself, unless that's going to require actually opening up holes and drilling through framing and making wires. So what would Richard consider to be the solution in their case?
There's so much in here to unpack, and I'm not going to be able to answer it all. But the first thing I want to comment on is that don't hold your breath until you die, because we're going to be waiting a long time for Ring to bring HomeKit to their security system.
Okay.
They have never officially announced that they're going to do that. They have officially announced.
Are Ring and Nest, they're two separate things, aren't they?
They're two separate things.
So he has Nest security system.
Oh, Nest.
Yeah, Nest, yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Not at all. No, there's plenty of these.
Identified the wrong thing there.
Okay.
All right.
So is Nest going to be coming to HomeKit at some point?
Is Nest going to come to HomeKit?
We mentioned that
earlier.
That
is probably even less likely, right?
Likely.
Because that is Google and Apple, who are not playing well together. Now, that said, there has been some reconciliation between Google and Amazon recently. So maybe Google is in a little bit more of a let's play nice mode, like Microsoft has been doing in software. I think that would be to their advantage, but it is not likely in the near term. So what I think you really need to do here is think about things in like their own domains. Your security system is one thing, and it will probably remain largely independent. However, there are some things you could do to tie a lot of these together without a whole lot of expense. Mm-hmm. And my favorite go-to is the Logitech Harmony remotes to pull a lot of stuff together if you have multiple devices. Mm-hmm. If you have devices that can be controlled by IP or that can be controlled through IR, or sometimes even through Bluetooth, there's a good chance that Harmony can support it. And it does it all without line of sight with the newer hub-based remotes. Yeah.
It can also accept voice commands from She Who Shall Not Be Named from Amazon's voice assistant there, and Google as well now, right? Google Home?
Right, exactly. So, for as little as a $50 investment, depending on what kind of remote you want. And honestly, my favorite Harmony remote is the $50 Harmony Smart Remote.
Okay.
It has no screen on it, but plenty of buttons.
Right.
Because whoever decided that we should have less buttons, they're wrong. Right? We should have the buttons that we need to get the things done that that our devices support. So I would recommend something like that. And then maybe something like SmartThings as a Z-Wave hub. Okay. Z-Wave can then tie into all of the different smart products that you could have around your home.
I mean, I'm looking at this situation because I've heard people describe a similar situation, and it does seem to be exactly what you're describing, largely based around Logitech Harmony, and then usually a Z-Wave hub of some sort. And then it seems like the next step after that is you call somebody who installs Control 4, and that's sort of where you, if you really want exactly what Elizabeth, his wife, described of one system that does it all, and you don't have to have some parts separate, and it'll even control the home theater, and everything is from one interface that you can have spread around your house and on your mobile devices. I'm almost leaning towards I think your wife has the right idea. Maybe it is time to call somebody and have Control 4 installed.
Yeah, potentially, because the big unknown here is the screen and the masking. Right? Those are two separate things potentially that have different apps, and who knows how they could be interfaced with, or if they could be interfaced into your remote control system. And certainly there are ways that you can have a dry contact switch that'll send a low voltage signal to bring the, to start a motor. And certainly that's kind of an age-old trick with installers. And you can buy devices like that yourself, but that that may not work in his case, or all that stuff may be behind walls, so he can't get to it.
Yes, yeah.
And so this is another one of those it depends thing, but that line is drawn at how easy or hard is it going to be to integrate with the motorized screen and masking system.
Yeah, I mean, which I know for sure, coming from Stuart Film Screen, will absolutely be integrated if it's Control 4. That there's zero question that those two brands get along swimmingly well. So I'm almost leaning that way, Karl. If it is something that is affordable, at the very least, I'd suggest get some estimates, because you're not committed to that. And I think once I will predict, once your wife gets some explanation from the installers, and definitely get a few in and get multiple estimates on this, but once you start seeing what that system can do, I think you might lean that way. So
and I just want to say something on the price there, because that's what really turns a lot of people away. Control 4 is probably the most affordable of many of these installer systems. And while with all of the things that he mentioned, he's certainly not in this area, but you can get into Control 4 for just a little bit over $1,000.
Right, with the least expensive controller that they offer, right?
Right.
As far as the hardware goes, yeah.
Right.
All right, well, let's move along to Chad B. Chad has, you'll never guess this, Philips Hue lighting. He also has several Nest products. So again, Nest is coming up. He's got thermostats, cameras, and a doorbell. And then he's got, in his theater, his Denon X60 400H. He's got an NVIDIA Shield, and he's also got a QNAP network attached storage device that he's using to store all his Plex. So I'm not sure if he's using his NVIDIA Shield as his Plex media server, or the one that's available on the QNAP, but either way, he's running Plex. So he loves each product individually, and each individual app works really nicely. But of course, he wanted to integrate them and tie them all together, so he tried a Harmony Hub, and he says it functions. You know, he can press watch a movie and all of his home theater will power on. It'll go to the correct inputs. His lights will dim. His HVAC will get set. He can check the camera if he wants to. All of these things function, but he finds it very slow because the Harmony is sending out one command at a time. And then, you know, it gets there eventually, but he thinks it's a bit clunky, and to him it's a bummer because he was excited that this is finally going to do it. And it's like, yeah, you press that button and then you wait and you get there eventually, but it's not quite what he had in mind. So he finds himself still picking up each device remote. He finds himself still busting out each individual app, especially when it's like a single setting that he wants to tweak or something like that. Again, he could dig through the Harmony's pages or its list of devices, and it is possible to do it that way, but it's a bit clunky and slow. So he asks, is there a better solution, or does he have to go to like Control 4 or Crestron or something?
Yeah, this is a fair question. So, you know, we just talked about the Harmony, and the Harmony does integrate with a lot of things through IR. Mm-hmm. And if you're communicating through IR and you're turning devices on and off, and they have any sort of warm-up time associated with that, then the overall experience of switching from one device to another could take up to 30 seconds to get to the point where, okay, you're good to run now.
Yeah.
And that can be extremely frustrating for people. I totally get that. So a couple things that I recommend. One is that, first of all, you can tune that. If you haven't already in the Harmony software, and I mean, Logitech software is notoriously horrible. I understand that. But it does have the options to allow you to say exactly how many seconds you pause.
Yeah, milliseconds
from
even,
one
isn't
device.
It? Yeah.
Right. From one device to the next. And even sequence them in a way that might be more efficient. If you know the TV takes longer, then start that first. Mm-hmm. And then maybe start something else. And then once the TV is switched, is fully on, then switch it to a different input or something like that. All of that can take some time, but you can optimize that.
Right, you can shorten it a bit. It'll never be instant. It'll never be, I press the button and everything is set exactly where I want it with a Harmony system, but you can shorten the intervals, yeah.
Yep. Now I'm going to make a recommendation for something to consider that is a product that I don't generally recommend.
Okay.
And that is the Kavo Control Center. So Kavo, a couple years ago, came out with this relatively expensive, beautiful wood-grained controller that you could plug, I think, 8 or 10 HDMI devices into, and it got lots of press attention, but didn't really do a whole lot in terms of getting them any product recognition, if you will, because it seemed like a flash in the pan. But just less than a year ago, they came out with a $100 version of that that now only costs $60 with a subscription annually of, I believe, $30 or $40.
Okay.
And that product is essentially an HDMI switcher that controls as much of your entertainment center as it can through HDMI CEC and IP. And
we don't like HDMI CEC here at AVRant, but that's okay.
The things that it can't do through that,
yeah,
it will do through IR.
Okay.
Now, I will tell you, HDMI CEC has been so poorly implemented in most vendors' products that it has been a complete failure in the industry. However, I have never seen a product that harnesses and controls CEC as well as Kavo's Control Center does. They do a phenomenal job of eking every little thing that they can out of it before then reverting to IP or IR control. So that is, in my opinion, that's worth considering.
Does it also control Hue lights and Nest products, though?
It is not going to control stuff like that.
Oh, okay.
No.
So that would be the fly in the ointment that on that particular part of things here.
No. That is correct, yes. Now, my particular complaint about Kavo is that I don't like the remote itself. Mm-hmm. They have the philosophy, let's get rid of as many buttons as we possibly can.
I mean, they want you to talk to it, don't they?
They want you to talk to it. And they have their own voice engine. They're not using one of the big players. And it is pretty good as a voice remote, but it is a largely buttonless, highly shiny and fingerprint attracting device that doesn't have the volume buttons in the right position as far as I'm concerned. And so the remote is what kills it for me. But a lot of people don't care about that so much, right? Like a lot of people are like, yeah, but it put it all in one place. And that's what I really wanted to do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Chad even asked, could one of the other voice assistants potentially offer a better experience? Like, he already uses Apple products, so he's familiar with Siri, but he's disabled Siri because it so often activates when you don't really want it to activate, or it responds with searching the web, and, you know, it's not entirely as useful as he would like to be. So he's switched Siri off, and then he's wondering, are any of the other ones better? Is Kavo's better? Is Google Home better? Amazon's voice assistant? Are any of those better?
So in my experience, when you are using voice as opposed to like a universal remote or something, voice is far less successful at accomplishing what you really wanted it to do.
Okay.
And everybody's playing in this field now, but you just have to be used to the fact that maybe 50% of the time it's going to do what you wanted it to do.
Ooh, okay.
That's not acceptable for most family members.
Yeah. I mean, for
the geek in the house may be okay with that.
Yeah.
Everybody else is probably screaming at you.
I mean, for what Chad described, when I think of, say, Amazon's voice assistant doing this stuff, I'm thinking about using it to control a Harmony Hub, because the Harmony Hub is actually, I think, going to be controlling the lights, the Nest products, and all of his home theater gear, not the Amazon voice assistant directly. Yeah.
And it's good for the basic stuff, like turn on the TV or switch to some channel. It can do that fairly well, not always. And if there's noise in the background and you're listening, you're watching TV, the TV is on, your voice assistant has to differentiate from what it's hearing from the TV and from you, and it's just not it's not there yet.
So it will
be at some point.
It almost sounds as though our answer at the moment for Chad is try optimizing your Harmony Hub system first, because if it gets you to a point where you're happy with it, then great. That has solved that issue. But otherwise, is he looking at like Control 4? Because it seems like maybe that's where this leads if he can't optimize it enough to satisfy him.
Yeah, I mean, if that's something that he has an appetite for, but again, that's going to be a greater expense, and it may be the sledgehammer for the bug. I don't know.
Yeah. Well,
And I think he mentioned also that he had a friend who had
Yes.
an installer system.
that's right. Yeah, one of Chad's friends has a Crestron system installed, and then that friend bought some Hue lights and
Hue light bulbs.
wanted to just add it to the. He's like, I already got this Crestron system. I think it's pretty darn nice. I want to add some of my lights, and he's like, I can't do this myself. So is there a way for him to do it, to just add it to his existing Crestron system, or does he have to call back his Crestron installer?
Call him back. Truck roll.
There it is. Alrighty. Well, Tate asked a question before, but now we're into a new section, and Tate is here again with a question that fits this section. And he wants to know which remote Richard would recommend most highly for a home theater system that has, so he's got an OLED, that sounds familiar, a Denon receiver, but you're pretty familiar with Denon receivers, and then an Xfinity cable box, an Apple TV, an Xbox One. What's your go-to remote?
Yeah, I mean, except for the receiver, he largely described my setup myself. Again, my go-to remote is the Harmony Smart Remote. It is the screenless $50, usually on sale, remote through Amazon. They also make a very very similar remote that has buttons that can control some smart home devices.
Right, that have actual dedicated little smart home buttons on it. Yeah.
Right. And that's nice. It doesn't have labels for them. You know, two look like a plug and two look like a light bulb.
Light bulbs, yeah.
It gives you the ability to control things directly if you want to do that. I have tried so many different remotes over the last several years.
Yeah. Including Cavo. So it's, yeah.
Including Cavo, including every one of the remotes from the folks at Harmony that have screens on them. And I like the one that has the buttons on it.
How about that Amazon Fire TV Cube? Did you ever give that thing a go?
I did not.
Okay. I would still recommend Harmony as well. So I think we'll leave that answer there. And we'll move on to Ian E. Ian bought an Epson 5040 UB. He hasn't bought his screen yet. And he has it in mind that he would like to have several different screen sizes and aspect ratios, along with many different picture presets. So first up, let's talk about his screen. He would like to start with a 160-inch diagonal 16:9 aspect ratio screen. This would be for his IMAX features or when it's a CinemaScope screen, but it has something that goes into the black bars. Sometimes the subtitles go down there, or certain movies, things come out of the black bars. So then he would like to keep that same large screen width, but be able to mask it down so that it's 2.35:1 for CinemaScope. And then from there, he'd like to be able to keep that same screen height of CinemaScope, but make it narrower so that when he's watching traditional HD TV, it'll be smaller than CinemaScope. And then beyond that, he'd also like to be able to have like Academy 4:3 screen ratio, not necessarily 4:3 SD TV, but the Academy size for classic films. And then also, for some reason, he wants a smaller 2.35:1 option. I'm not quite sure what that's about, but that's what he wants. So he was thinking he might be able to achieve all of this less expensively than the obvious solution, if you're willing to pay for it, is 4-way masking screen, but those are into $10,000 and up. So he wants something less expensive. He was thinking he'd get a motorized screen, just a regular motorized drop-down screen, one that's acoustically transparent from Seymour AV, and then also get their motorized side masking. So the screen itself can move up and down, and then masks on the left and right can move up and down independent of that. He's thinking he'd roll the full screen down for IMAX, then roll the screen only part way down for CinemaScope. So it would actually raise the screen up, and the top of the screen would be the actual edge of the case of the screen, and then the bar below that. And then he could keep it in that partially rolled down position, deploy the side masks. That gives him his 16:9, and then combinations of moving the screen up and down and the side masks up and down give him his other aspect ratios. So he's asking how easy could he control all of that, get these aspect ratios. Seymour AV says they have a 4-wire controller that can use IR or RF and control that with a universal remote, but does it have memories built in so he could just push a button and it goes to the aspect ratio that he wants?
Yeah, this is an easy one. I mean, it sounds so simple, right? My response on this is call a Home Tech Pro. This is probably not something that you want to try to solve yourself. I understand everything that he wants to do.
Yeah, the
and
multiple
he just
aspect
kind
ratios.
of described the ideal home cinema experience for me. But to do that and it's hard for me to answer, am I going to be able to have different stops on this? Am I going to be able to set this to different sizes and then just select what I want? Well, unfortunately, I don't know enough about the different equipment that he's looking at and what capabilities it allows in terms of its interface to third-party products. An installer is going to know that, and a home tech pro is going to know what you can do there. Now, he may be able to find stuff on Reddit or on tech forums that provide the information that he needs to pull this off with DIY products, but this strikes me as something that's beyond that scope.
Well, I'm going to weigh in here with some alternative answers because this is getting into the home theater section and Seymour AV, which is a company that we recommend very often. And if you're talking about the regular Seymour AV motorized screen with the motorized side masking, you can't do exactly what you're describing. It's mostly up-down. That's what the control is. Even the RS-232 control in that one it's an up-down trigger that's going on in there. So you wouldn't be able to do what you're describing exactly as wrote. You could go over to their sister company, Seymour Screen Excellence, because that is a custom installer dedicated channel that they sell their products to. But those products that they sell through Seymour Screen Excellence offer more control along these lines. But I want you to put all of that out of your head because I don't think this is really the solution that you want. My take on this is, first of all, I don't like the idea of using the case as the top edge of your CinemaScope screen. That's not usually going to work out the way that you want it. I understand thinking, I don't want black bars, I'd rather have masking, but I can't afford 4-way motorized masking, so I'm going to try and use the motorized screen to do it. In my experience, it doesn't work out well. You end up with a shadow, and you still have the black bar, quote-unquote, being projected above and below the screen. Now, you're talking about a 5040 UB, which has really good black levels inherently. I will highly recommend to you the solution that Tom always hates when I mention it, but 2 screens. I want you to get 2 screens. And I don't want you to get any masking on either of them, because it's not necessary. You get one big 16:9 screen, and when it's CinemaScope time, you live with the black bars, because they're good on the 5040 UB. You're not talking about a projector with crappy black levels. Those black levels are going to look pretty darn black. And when it's HD TV time, you roll down a second smaller screen. You roll up the first one, you roll down a second one. And considering that the price to add the motorized masking is like 50% of the cost of the screen, getting that second smaller screen is barely any more expensive than getting the one that has the motorized masking integrated into it. Again, for 4x3, I just live with the black bars on the left and right. Again, they're going to be pretty darn good. I don't think you're going to be fully satisfied with the solution as you described. If you want to do this the way you're describing, Seymour Screen Excellence, and you get one of the 4-way masking screens. But you're going to have to pay over $10,000 for it. So we'll move on to the next section because that was I don't think he's going to like my answer, but it's my honest take. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. So his Epson 5040 UB, he knows it offers motorized lens adjustments with memories, and you can have up to 10 different positions stored in those lens memories. And then he would need that for his motorized screen idea, he would need multiples of these because he'd have to move the lens up, he'd have to move the lens down, zoom it in, zoom it out, all of those things. But the Epson remote itself only has 2 dedicated buttons on it. So to call up any of the other remaining 8 lens memory positions, you'd have to call up the screen menu on the Epson and then select which one you want. So does that work in a predictable enough manner that he could just write a sequence in his Harmony remote, press a single button, and it goes to the lens position that he wants?
I would assume absolutely not, because it's always going to be relative to the position it was in before, in all likelihood. Yeah. So, and that's kind of what I was thinking when I said work with a home tech pro, because even if you were okay with his idea of dynamically adjusting the screen with masking and stuff, a home tech pro would be able to write code that would automatically accommodate for what size it is now and what size you want it to be, and set everything accordingly, regardless of which combination you're switching from and to.
Yeah, it's much more complicated than what most people are going to do in their own Harmony software as a end user themselves. Yeah.
Yeah. Now there is a possibility. I don't know, but there is a possibility that the projector he has actually has commands that can be triggered for those 10 different positions, but they're not accessible from the native remote itself. And if that's the case, then it's possible that Harmony can access them. You know, one of the things that I find is that my Harmony can do way more on some of my devices than the actual remote that came with the device can do.
Yep. Including discrete on-off, which is the most common one. I mean, mine going back to my previous answer, I sidestep all of this by just saying you only have the 2 screen sizes. You only need 2 lens memory positions, one zoomed in, one zoomed out, and I'm not going to worry about moving things up and down with a given width or a given height. So I kind of sidestepped all of that if you follow my 2-screen recommendation. And then lastly, he also wants several different picture settings. He wants to have the screen at full width, and that would give him, day and night modes for both SDR and HDR. So that's 4 picture modes that he would like to have for the largest screen size. And then when he goes down to the smaller 16:9 screen size, he wants to have day and night modes for both SDR and HDR again. So 8 picture presets in total. Is that something he can achieve? And again, with the reliability, you press a single button on the Harmony and it goes to the picture mode that you want.
And again, I'd probably say no, because in my experience, and you may know differently, but in my experience, picture mode is not something that is directly addressable through most interfaces. So again, it means a relative change from where you were to where you want to go, and that would require some custom programming.
Yeah, so I have the answer to that. So 100% agree with Richard, not that easy, not the single button press, but you could write a sequence that gets you to the part of the memory, part of the menu system where you then manually select which of the 4 picture modes that you want. So you can at least have the one button press that just says change picture mode. That does the number of button presses to get you to that part of the menu. Then you manually select it. So it's not quite what you're asking for, but it's a little easier than all the button presses individually to get to that part of the menu. So that's not too difficult. But this 8 picture mode thing, the way I would adjust this to you is the Epson 5040 actually has 4 picture modes that will work nicely for this. It has one called Bright Cinema, which should be your day SDR mode. All right. It has one called Natural, which should be your night SDR mode. And then it has one called Cinema, which should be your day HDR mode, and one called Digital Cinema. That should be your night HDR mode. The Cinema and Digital Cinema actually bring a DCI P3 color filter into the light path. So that's why you'd want to use for those for the HDR modes. Now, for switching between the larger screen and the smaller screen, I would switch your lamp mode at that point. You're going to want the high lamp mode for the big screen and the low lamp mode for the little screen. And that gets you your 8 different permutations using 4 different picture presets that are in there and then 2 different lamp modes.
But the question then is, how do you map that to your remote? Right?
Once again, you'd press the sequence to change lamp, and you'd press the sequence to change picture mode, but you will have to manually make the selection between which is which.
Right.
Yeah, so not quite as slick as you want, but not as bad as all the button presses manually. Let's see, Martin D.
If you have the money, Ian, I mean, first of all, Ian, I'm impressed by the mental exercises that you made Rob go through to think outside of this box. But if you have the money, I think it would be worth at least getting a quote on what it would take to get some sort of custom solution for what you want to do.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I should mention that I know what Tom's response would be to this, which would be, why are you worrying about all of this? Get one big 16:9 screen, settle on like 2 separate picture modes, and that would definitely be Tom's. Let's simplify this solution. But both Richard and I are willing to just jump down the rabbit hole and think, is there a way to get this complicated?
Oh, yeah.
So Martin D wrote to us on Facebook. Martin uses an Apple TV 4K and HomeKit, and then he also has a Denon X4400H, and he has an Epson Pro Cinema 4040, and that is connected via a 12-volt trigger to his motorized screen. No masking on this one, just a regular motorized screen. He also has Panasonic's UB820 UltraHD Blu-ray player. So he'd like to be able to control his whole home theater setup with his voice. So what would be the simplest way to achieve that?
Yeah, so the tricky thing is he's talking about this being connected through HomeKit. He uses an Apple TV 4K and HomeKit.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming when he says voice, he wants to use this with Siri.
Sure.
Right now, the Siri integration with AV equipment is so limited. It's really, really limited.
Yeah.
So I think his best bet here might be something like the Harmony Express remote. Now, we haven't talked about this before. The Harmony Express is the overpriced remote that has not enough buttons, but it has Amazon's Assistant built in.
It's their newest one, right? It's the newest of the Harmony remotes that it has a giant button to call up She Who Shall Not Be Named there.
Right. So for more than the cost of a Harmony and an Amazon Echo, you can get one device that has both of those things together, and it allows you to control all your different components just with your voice. And with the voice stuff, it works really well because, like an X1 remote from Comcast, the mic is right at your mouth.
Right.
You
and
have
you
to
get
press
to
and hold
activate
the
it
button.
that way. Yeah, you don't have to say the wake word. You press that button, it's right there. Yeah.
Exactly. So that may do the job for you. Another thing to consider might be, again, another Harmony remote, and use the skill that's available from Harmony for either Google Home or for your Echo to turn all these things on. Now, I said not yet on the Siri stuff because with iOS 13, Apple is adding significant additional capabilities that I think will get us closer to the point where full home theater control is feasible. And we're already starting to see some of this leak into the news now. LG TVs are going to get HomeKit control tomorrow from the day that we're recording this.
Yeah.
So we're getting closer and closer. And if you're using CEC, I know most people don't like it, but if you're using CEC, that alone, by asking Siri to turn on your TV, may be enough to get everything else to turn on.
So yeah, I mean, the Harmony Express, we can say today, is a fairly nice solution because it's still a Harmony. I mean, it just happens to be a Harmony that has Amazon's voice assistant built right into it, but it's still a Harmony. It still does all the commands and control that a Harmony remote does, which he's talking strictly about home theater products in his question. It will definitely control all of those things. There's no question about that.
It will, for as much as you can do with 9 buttons.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's the big limitation.
You're going to have to rely on your activities because that's what Amazon's Assistant will be good at calling up, is the activities you've written.
Exactly. And it is very good at doing that. So definitely something to consider.
All right. Well, Chad B asked a question before, but he's back again. We're into a whole different topic now. He just wants to know what Richard is looking forward to seeing at CEDIA coming up later this year, or other home automation expos that happen throughout the year. What gets Richard excited, and what is he expecting to see getting announced and released in the near future?
Yeah, so this year I'm going to be sitting on the beach during CEDIA. So unfortunately,
congrats.
I'm going to miss this year's event. And it's actually kind of frustrating to me because I really like it. But there are a couple things that I think are pretty cool that are happening kind of right now. Like, we're in the beta period for iOS 13. I mentioned iOS 13 before. I honestly think that iOS 13 is going to take HomeKit to a whole new level that we've never seen before. And the big reason for that, I don't know how much public knowledge there is of this right now, but a kind of a sleeper on iOS right now is the Shortcuts app. The app that allows you to integrate all these different things that apps on your phone are capable of doing, as well as some of its own inherent things, the capabilities of the phone itself. And in iOS 13, HomeKit and Shortcuts are going to be integrated in a way that you can create automations that leverage shortcuts. And that is huge. That is really, really big because it gives you far more granular control, and it gives you a logic engine to use for far more complex logic and automation than you could do in HomeKit already. So I'm very excited about what we're going to see in HomeKit later this year.
Yeah, it's It's interesting seeing these giant tech companies go at it because they do seem to sort of, one needs to catch up and then they might leapfrog the others a little bit. And I'm glad at least there's that much competition going on amongst them.
Well, and the thing that's a little bit ironic about that is that that's fairly complex. And Apple is all about, let's do the thing that just works, right? But they're giving people who want it a set of tools that's going to allow them to do really complex things. I think that's incredibly cool.
Cool.
One of the other products that's out there, and this is so simple. We've been talking about Hue lighting this entire time. We've heard for a while now about this Friends of Hue program. And Friends of Hue is, well, it used to be stuff in the Philips line that isn't really Hue, but they wanted to market it as part of Hue. Now, Friends of Hue is a partner program. And what that means is that you could be lighting manufacturer ABC and decide that I want to create a Hue product. And that product could be a light switch. It could be a scene controller. It could be a fixture that you install as a chandelier or somewhere in your home. And these products are starting to come out now. Just yesterday, in fact, I saw some really cool new products that are third-party products that are essentially like lighting bars that use the luminescence that can go through a piece of glass and light the edge of glass with the full color spectrum of the Hue lighting system that is really built off of the old company Color Kinetics. It is amazing. and I'm really looking forward to the things that we're going to see third-party vendors come out with leveraging Hue technology.
Awesome. Well, we're going to move on to something that's definitely off the beaten path, and it seems as though Fred was just hoping that somebody like Richard would come along to maybe answer this question, because it is not your standard fare. Fred has 2 of Sony's 400-disc DVD mega changers that he connected to an Eshent Fireball, which is a DVD-CD manager. Eshent went out of business in 2015, but Fred had already completely filled up his 2 DVD mega changers, so he just continued to use that Eshent management system. And that was before all of the updates came to an end, so the way it was in 2015, it has remained until this day. He also has a Sony 400-disc Blu-ray mega changer, and that also isn't supported anymore, so he filled up that changer and downloaded all the metadata. It used to use Grace Note for all of that before that support was pulled. So he has these 2 large disc collections. He's got 800 DVDs, he's got 400 Blu-rays. The Eshent system and the Sony Blu-ray Mega Changer for the Blu-rays, they have separate UIs. And he'd like to just be able to integrate his DVDs and his Blu-rays, still all handled by the Mega Changers, so he doesn't want to get rid of those. And then he wants to be able to just look through cover art, pick which movie he wants, and have it play. Is there a way to do that?
Wow. Well, first of all, can I say that I'm so excited to hear of somebody who has more physical media discs than I do. So I have one of the Sony. Actually, I have multiple Sony Mega Changers.
So Richard is the right man to ask.
Do you know where most of mine are, Rob?
Storage somewhere?
They're in my basement.
Yeah,
they're in my basement, and so there are different types of the Mega Changers, and we don't necessarily know which one he has, but some of them were actually compatible way back when with the Media Center.
Yes. Yeah.
You could control the DVD changer directly through Media Center and have that integrated directly with Media Center movies.
Yeah.
And it was really, really cool.
And he could use something like My Movies to pull in all the metadata, have the cover art, and do exactly what he's describing. But that was for the DVD changers, not for the Blu-ray changer, and that means it's the same situation. He'd be swapping the Eshent interface for the Media Center interface, but he'd still end up using the Sony Blu-ray player's interface for the Blu-rays. It doesn't really solve his problem, unfortunately.
Right, and arguably My Movies might be something that could help solve that problem. Like My Movies might be able to interface with these devices and might be able to control it, but again, it's Media Center. Media Center is not only is it no longer supported in existence, but the operating system that it runs on is not going to be supported in about a year's time.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Right now, I don't see a really good solution for keeping these in play and having any sort of consolidated experience short of
Coming
a
up
Home
next.
Tech Pro.
Okay, yeah.
No,
okay.
a Home Tech Pro could link them, right?
Right.
Like these devices were designed to be connected, but it's not something that you're going to be able to do easily yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I saw a guy on a forum who was describing all this, and his solution ended up being to buy up as many of the Blu-ray changers as he possibly could, and he just replaced his DVD changers with the Blu-ray changers so they'd all share one interface. I don't think that's a solution because I have no idea where you'd find them anymore. Oh, sorry, your mic is
It's costly,
muted there.
and the other problem there is that how long is that going to work?
Yes, yeah. So, I mean, this is my thinking, Richard's thinking, I'm pretty sure, and also the thinking of Fred here. He's thinking maybe it's time to just move over to Plex. You know, you get rid of the physical discs, you back everything up onto hard drives, and we move over to Plex. But he's got over 1,300 discs, which means he actually has more than fits into his 1,200 slots in his mega changers, so he's gone even beyond that capacity. But he's like, I'm not going to back up each of these 1,300 discs one at a time, like sit there, wait for it to rip, and then, you know, do what I need to do and put in the next disc. So is there a way to like just automate that process, including he would like to have an auto loader for the discs themselves. He doesn't even just want, say, multiple optical disc drives in his one tower, you know, that pop out when they're done. He's like, no, I want to just throw in a stack of my existing disc movies and have this go through automated and come back when that batch is done. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, so absolutely, I think Plex is your best bet here. You want to basically come out of this with MKVs that have the highest quality audio and highest quality picture that you can get off of the movies that you have.
Which can be lossless to the original source. No.
Right. The trick there is that unless you're willing to do a lot of work, you're going to lose all the extra stuff.
Sure.
And I went through this process because I had the whole disc thing and I ultimately ended up converting to Plex and just deciding that, okay, this means that I don't have the extras that, by the way, I hardly ever watch anyway.
And they do pull in extras from the web. I mean, it does that as part of the thing, so you don't lose, like, you don't necessarily have the disc extras, although sometimes it is the disc extras that have been made available.
Yeah, sometimes
online.
it is. I mean, what it pulls in is stuff that's available on YouTube. So
Right.
you may or may not have the same stuff that you
Yeah.
have as
And
extras.
Theoretically possible within Make MKV to write a script so that it does capture the extras, although you'll probably also get a bunch of video files that you don't want, little ones. But it is theoretically possible to do that.
Yeah, that's a hassle. Just resign yourself that you don't need the extras. If
Okay.
you want the extras, there's probably, I have a drawer full of discs that are interesting enough to me that I think I'll probably watch the extras at some point. They're not down in the basement or in the garage with all the other covers. I have the discs in their container in a drawer near my entertainment center because every once in a while I might want to pull one of them and pop it in my Xbox and watch it. So that's how I handle that situation. It's rare enough that I don't worry about it. But for the movies, Plex is fantastic for the movies. If you know, Plex is a great system. I used to hate it. I love it now. It's absolutely fantastic. And you have some links in the notes that we're talking from for some tools that may assist with this conversion, including Make MKV and even maybe some batch conversion stuff. I don't know about this whole autoloader stuff. I know the idea of 1,300 discs manually.
One at a time. Yeah.
Sounds daunting, but you know, your situation may be different from mine. I work from home. And for me, while I'm working, to be able to just see, oh, did it spit out the last disc? Oh, yeah, it did. Okay, I'll pop the next one in and click record was not a hard thing for me to do
5 to 10
over
a
the
day.
course of like a month.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I mean, if he's dedicated this, so I mean, he actually came across the Acro Nova NIMBY USB autoloader. So it's a USB 3 disc autoloader. It does read DVDs and Blu-rays. No Ultra HD Blu-rays, but he hasn't talked about that at all. So CDs, DVDs, Blu-rays, this thing will, act as a CD reader. Everyone who has used it has said, do not load it to its maximum capacity. That amount of weight when you begin will cause jamming errors. So that seems to be something to be aware of, but certainly more than just one disc at a time that you could potentially use this for. It's a $900 device, so you're spending some money to use this thing. But the thing is, you probably want to use the software that comes with it. It will create just an ISO of the disc. So that's just the whole disc now sitting on your hard drive. But of course, to do that with copy-protected content, you need something like Red Fox's AnyDVD HD running in the background, because it won't just take the disc with its own software that's included, but it will be able to create an ISO if you've already gone around the copy protection with Red Fox's AnyDVD HD. Now, that gets you to step one, which is that you could auto-load a whole bunch of ISOs. You could then, in not too difficult a fashion, take those ISO files and batch convert those in Make MKV. I mean, there's a thing just called the Make MKV batch converter, which is specifically for that purpose of taking a bunch of ISOs and turning them into MKV files that Plex will work with really nicely. So it'd be a two-step process, but the thing is, once you have the ISOs, just telling Make MKV batch converter to run, that's not a tremendous amount of physical work at all. So that could be an idea. And I think that's about that one. I'd just say have some patience and just do it over time. All right.
It's not that horrible. I mean, I have 900 movies.
Yep.
And way many TV series where I actually had to get individual episodes off of discs.
Yeah.
So I understand the pain, but I feel like the end result is worth it.
Yep. And it'll be supported a bit longer than Eschent. We know that. So we're going to wrap up the home automation talk here with one last thing that I wanted to talk about, which is we hear that term home automation. We certainly hear smart home. That's the biggest buzzword probably out there right now. We also hear connected home sometimes. But there's a term that I thought of, and Richard already informed me. The industry's come up with something else, but I actually think mine is still slightly different. I want to call it the considerate home. I want a home that is considerate of my needs, which is, we've got the type of home automation right now, which, as complex as it is, all the things that we've talked about, you could still say it kind of still boils down to timers and macros and sensors and if-then statements, that type of thing. And if I notice something in my house isn't reacting the way I want it to, I can't just tell it, hey, do this differently, and it will, or it doesn't notice that I'm not reacting in a positive manner and adjust itself. It's not considerate of me. I would still have to program the thing to do. So we've got a gazillion connected devices. They all have each individual app. We want to integrate those things. And this concept of the smart home seems at the moment to be wrangling together all the connected devices, but can we, how far away are we from what I'm calling the considerate home, and what's the proper term? Because there is one.
Yeah, there is one. The term in the industry these days seems to be the conscious home, the home that is aware of its contents and who's living in it and where they are and
how
what
they're
doing.
reacting to what it's doing. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So this is obviously where we want to get, right? We want to get to the point where we don't have to write scripts that account for all the possibilities of the things that we might do and the exceptions and those edge cases, like that time when your daughter gets off from school early, so that door is going to unlock earlier than you're anticipating it will. There's all kinds of stuff that you can't expect mortals to have to deal with to implement intelligent homes. So there are a couple companies that are trying to do this better. Josh AI is the first one that comes to mind. And Josh AI is a voice-controlled home control system that has, as its name implies, what I would argue is actual AI. It's actually learning from the behaviors in the home to then adjust the way that it handles things and anticipate the needs of its occupants. And so I think we're going to see more people who are doing that. But the problem with this is that to do this right, we need actual AI.
Mm-hmm.
AI is complicated.
No kidding.
AI,
I don't think we really have it yet, to be honest. I'm
well,
not sure we really do.
In all fairness, AI exists, but very few companies are actually doing AI. Everybody's talking about AI.
Yes.
AI was last year's marketing buzz
Absolutely.
at CES.
Yes. Every TV
Right?
is claiming to have AI in it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. No, what you have is the Google Assistant. And
Sure.
does the Google Assistant use AI? Well, arguably, yes, it is starting to use some AI technologies at Google in the cloud.
Right.
And so that opens a whole new set of problems because this means to really do the kind of thing that you want to do, it's not going to be like running on some hub in your attic. You need the cloud to make this
Right.
happen. That means, and how do you respond to what's going on in a home? You have sensors
Yes.
that know where you are and can figure out what you're doing.
Yeah.
That means cameras.
Yep.
And can anticipate what you need next, which means a history of what you've done.
Mm-hmm.
And all of that has to be in the cloud
No. No.
for it to figure out, okay, well, what might the occupants want me to do for it next? And so I feel like we're really far from this.
Okay.
But there are definitely companies that are trying. Google is pushing really hard in this space. Amazon says they are. I know that Amazon in AWS has an AI engine that pretty much anyone can implement and play with, but I don't know that I would consider what Amazon is doing yet AI. I think we have a couple years till we see us getting closer to this for for that thing that we see in sci-fi films.
Yes. In Star Trek. We like that computer.
That's like, I feel like that's at least 10 years out.
Okay.
We'll have self-driving cars before we have that.
All right. Well, we have peppered Richard with DIY home automation questions. I think it's time for Richard to turn the tables because he has a question for me, I believe.
I do, actually. So, I do all this podcasting and writing about technology products, but it's primarily for DIYers. It's for geeks. It's for people who love this stuff. And every once in a while, I forget that normal people don't necessarily want to deal with all of the stuff that we have to go through and all of the complexity that we're willing to put up with. So one of my partner's clients was interested in getting a 4K Blu-ray player.
Yep.
And of course, my go-to recommendation for a Blu-ray player is just buy an Xbox.
Okay.
The problem is the software for playing Blu-ray discs in the Xbox just sucks miserably.
It's also, I mean, that is not a regular remote. That is a different controller you are picking up from.
Well, yeah, so, you also have to buy a Harmony, and then you have to map the functions from the Harmony to the capabilities of the Xbox. And then you have to recognize the fact that even though after you do that, the software that plays Blu-ray players doesn't actually let you use shuttle controls to move around in the content.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's just insane. It's all on-screen controls that you have to navigate. It's terrible. If you're a geek, you probably don't care. But the rest of the world is not going to be up for that. So, if you're someone who's just like a mere mortal and you want a good 4K player, but you don't want to be spending crazy amounts of money, what would you recommend for that?
Wouldn't it be nice if there were a super simple answer to that?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I mean, I can get you something I consider reasonably close to a fairly simple answer, and I'll give it to you right away because this is where we're going to end up, and it remains Sony's X800, not the brand new X800 M2. The X800.
Okay.
You can still quite easily get it. It's available on Amazon for $250, which is not the cheapest price you'll find any Ultra HD Blu-ray player, but it's not ridiculously expensive. And, I mean, it's a traditional Sony disc player, and it will do exactly what you expect it to do. You plug it in with HDMI, and it will play all of your movie discs. Great. It will also play Super Audio CDs and DVD audio discs if you want to. It's a universal disc player. So it covers all those bases. The one feature it does not have is it does not support Dolby Vision. And I'm going to beg you to not care, because you will still get HDR. You will still get HDR10. And that is fine, because if you get into the wrinkle of I must have Dolby Vision, it gets so stupidly complicated, and there's no way it should be. There is Sony's X700. There's also Sony's X800 M2 that I just mentioned. They technically support Dolby Vision, but you have to manually toggle that support on and off. And if you do, even if the content is a DVD, which we know does not have Dolby Vision on it, your TV will still kick into Dolby Vision mode. That's how Sony has implemented Dolby Vision. It's ridiculous. So are your mics off?
Which is kind of like how Apple TV does the HDR too. It's just like kind of always on.
Well, the Apple TV doesn't have to. You actually have to turn Dolby Vision off in the Apple TV and then tell it to natively output 4K SDR and then tell it to match dynamic range in the
It can be that is problematic. In my experience, that is quite problematic. In any event,
yes.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
quite frankly, I don't think she's going to care whether it's handling the Dolby Vision or not. I don't think, again, most consumers, most mortals, even know or care about the difference there.
Well, I mean, if you
they
tell
have
somebody
that popping HDR picture, they're going to be happy with it.
If you tell somebody a Sony, they're not going to like go, what? Never heard of that. So at least there's no shock there. I mean, I would love to be able to tell you one of the Panasonic players, because they have support for, well, some of them have support for all the HDR formats and that type of thing. But in the US, it's really only the UB820, which is $500. And I don't consider that relatively inexpensive. That to me is getting pretty pricey. There was the 420, the UB420 from Panasonic, but it doesn't support Dolby Vision. And then there's the new UB450, which supports both Dolby Vision and HDR10 Plus and HDR10 and is a more reasonable price, but it's not available in the United States. It's only in Europe. And strangely, there's some places we can track it down in Canada. So the Sony X800 is my answer to you, and as long as Dolby Vision lighting up on the TV is not the number one priority, I would recommend that. Well, we are quickly running out of time here, but I wanted. Usually we start with the news and some comments, but I wanted to make sure we got through all the home automation stuff while we have Richard here with us. I'm not sure how long you're able to stick around, because I'd love to at least get through last week's questions that we had left over. But if you need to step out, you just let me know, and I shall carry on. But
I can hang on for a little bit. I may need to step out and come back, but I'm good for now.
Alrighty, well, some news real quick. Denon released their X3600H. Now, why are we talking about a new AV receiver coming out? They come out every year. Well, it's because for the first time, the 3000 series is now a 9.2 receiver that can be expanded to 11 speakers, 7.2.4. Before, the X3000 series was always limited to 7 speakers maximum. For the first time, they brought it down to this $1,000 price point in Denon's lineup, a 7.2.4 model. And there's a new feature that I really want to highlight because it's buried in the feature sheet, but we've been talking about this for ages, which is that you can, in your main room, be playing surround sound while that very same source is simultaneously playing out of the Zone 2 output in downmixed stereo. They finally did it. It took this long. It was absolutely ridiculous, but we got there, folks. So wanted to mention that. That is finally.
No, so what did they do before? Did they only just have the front channels available for the other zones?
Whatever you were listening to, if you wanted to also play it in Zone 2, the source had to be sending out stereo. And then that meant you had stereo in the main zone. Yep.
Wow.
Yeah, you couldn't even have the source sending surround sound. So, yeah. that is, I'm glad to see that, and it's not what they're touting at all. And then via Andrew L, he wanted to let all of our AVRant listeners know that the Wavecrest Audio HVL-1 compact bookshelf speakers, they were designed by David Fabricant over at Ascend Acoustics. They're currently on sale. You can get them directly from Ascend instead of directly from Wavecrest for $79 a piece. So that's a $35 savings on each of those speakers, normally going for... these were going for what, $160 for a pair of them. Now they're normally $220. So
nice.
That's just a good deal on some compact bookshelf speakers. One thing I like about those, they of course match very nicely with the Ascend speakers that we recommend all the time, but these are a front ported design, so feel free to snug them up against a wall, which isn't always the case with compact speakers. So we'll quickly go through some comments that were mentioned here. Ted M, he wanted to share an episode of Bobby Owsinski's Inner Circle podcast, and he particularly wanted to mention an episode that is an interview with music producer Greg Penny, where they're deep diving into creating music mixes specifically for Atmos. So this is not your traditional movie fare. These are music mixes for Atmos, and we'll have the link for that particular podcast episode at avrant.com and in the show notes for this podcast episode. And then Rob F., who's in Perth, Australia, he just wanted to share some of his further HDMI woes. He wrote to us previously that when he was trying to use a 4K OLED and a 1080p BenQ projector at the same time, his Marantz SR6010 receiver, it has two HDMI outputs, but they're labeled main and zone 2, and no matter what he did, if he had them both plugged in at the same time, he couldn't get 4K sent to his OLED. It was like, nope, lowest common denominator, you both get 1080p. So we suggested using a physical HDMI switch, one that's just like a literal piece of metal moving back and forth. I suggested the Sewell IBIS Pro HDMI switch, and he got that, and it worked until he got himself a Fetch TV box, which down on Australia, it's one of the 4K free-to-air and cable TV options for getting 4K signals in Australia. And no matter what he did, it wouldn't send a signal to his projector at all. It's just like, I'll send you a 4K signal to your OLED, I just won't send anything to your projector. So apparently, I don't know if that's an HDCP 2.2 problem, or even when he's told the box to send out 1080p, it's like, nope, won't go to the projector. So he used that as an excuse to upgrade finally to a 4K projector. He got the BenQ HD 3550 that we've mentioned, $1,500 DLP 4K projector, really nice. So he had a 35-foot red mirror HDMI cable. That's one of the active HDMI cables. He already had that installed. Didn't work. So he got a Sewell Silverback HDMI cable that claims it has 18 gigabits per second bandwidth, like we always say to look out for. And with the playing movies and stuff, it worked. But then his Oppo 203, when it went to its menus, he got sparklies, because in the menus it's sending out 4K 60 12-bit. Now you could change that in the menus, because we know that it did work with a lower bandwidth signal, but it means it's not really sending all 18 gigabits per second. He was getting some sparkly. So he invested finally in a fiber optic HDMI cable. Cost him a pretty penny, but it works for everything, except if he plugs it into that Sewell IBIS Pro switch, it doesn't work anymore. And that's because that IBIS Pro switch, just to let him know, it's not a powered switch. There's no power going through that, so the fiber optic cable has nothing to draw its power from, unfortunately. That's kind of what's going on there. So he's got these two HDMI outputs on his Marantz, but then if he switches to Zone 2, everything gets limited to 2-channel. We just talked about that in his audio. So he's like, do I have to get a new AVR? Because this is starting to get really expensive. And he loves the picture quality of his new projector, so is there anything he can do there? If you get an active HDMI splitter, one that is separately powered, make sure it is a 4K 444 chroma 12-bit 18 gigabit per second powered HDMI splitter, then that'll light up your fiber optic cable, and it'll be less expensive than a whole new AVR.
Wow. So the fiber optic HDMI cable is something that I wasn't even aware of. How does that work? Is it actually using power to then power the chips at each end to convert the signal?
Built into the HDMI plug itself is a thing that converts the electrical signal to light impulses that get sent down the fiber optic. And if it's a fiber optic HDMI that says it supports the audio return channel, there is a little copper wire in there because it's not bi-directional. It's only sending the pulses from the source to the display. As far as light goes, for the audio return channel to work, there is a little piece of copper in there coming back the other direction.
Okay. All right.
Yep. So that's what's going on there. Yeah, do you want to stick around for a couple of questions, or?
Sure, I'll do what I can here.
Did you want to read these out since I read out all the questions to you?
Not really, no.
Okay, I'll continue on then. So Mike S., we're actually returning to this from last week. He's got a theater. It's roughly 20 feet by 13.5 feet by 7.5 feet. And he has his ceiling lined with some like soffit grids that he put in there. So we showed some images from this last week, but we'll run through a few again in the video here. So he mentioned last week that he doesn't want to lose a ton of his room's width by installing the acoustic panels, which he discovers he needs because he got some slap echo in there, and he was already thinking he'd like to recess his side surround speakers that are currently wall mounted, and he planned to make some soundproof backer boxes so that he could put that in there without destroying his soundproofing. And he was asking, should he make some custom acoustic panels that have openings for those recessed surround speakers and then have absorption like surrounding the speaker? And then should he also completely conceal this niche that he has on his right hand side where he's going to have some equipment in there and maybe like have a panel on a hinge or something like that? So I completely missed that. I was playing around with OBS when we were discussing that question. I completely missed that. So I would recommend to you that if you do the idea of, I don't mind recessing the surround speakers, but if you just want to gain that width back, that's a perfectly fine idea to me. But I wouldn't have them recessed behind absorption that goes around it. That's going to really mess up your dispersion, and you want your surrounds to have wide dispersion. So if you do that, I would still have the speaker front just proud of the absorption, which I'm thinking might mean not recessing the speaker at all, because if you put some like even just 2-inch thick insulation around this speaker, I'm like, that's kind of going to be the situation. I don't know if you could see the images, Richard, in the show notes there, if there's anything, any other thoughts that you have on that part.
Yeah, I don't. I wonder if those soffits are causing him any problems. Like, I'm wondering if that's all firm in there. And if so, if putting some absorption material inside the soffits might help a little bit.
Yeah, Lee suggested the same thing last week, and I'm in full agreement with that. So, I mean, visually, I don't think that's going to detract because it's all black up there. It's just right. Black up in those soffits.
And it looks awesome. Like, I love the look that gives the room.
Yeah, and he did it all himself. This is all DIY work, so tremendous. As far as covering up that niche, I mean, if you want to, I'm not opposed to it, except for the idea, I don't know how you're getting air circulation in and out of there. And I mean, even though air can move through absorption panels, it's insulation. It's literally insulation. It's meant to hold heat in. So I'm not really the hugest fan of that. And I don't think you need a panel right there, because it's literally right to the side of your seats. It's not a reflection point for sound waves to be reflecting off there. So if you want a visual cover, some kind of louvered door or something like that, but I'm not particularly in favor of covering that up with an absorption panel. So hopefully that answers what I missed there. We'll answer Joseph H, who wrote on Twitter. This is just a little bit of fun because Joseph likes looking up ridiculously expensive cables, which is not difficult to find. And he found this one that's from Transparent Audio, one of the companies that we love to hate, let's say. He found one on their reference MM10 speaker wire. It's 10 feet long for one pair. There's one speaker, 10 feet long. He found it's such a deal, only $9,000 for a lightly used one, because regularly it goes for $21,000.
Oh, wow.
Now, perfectly reasonable, right, Richard?
So you could get two, one for each speaker.
Oh, at least. I'm sure you're going to want to buy amp them. You should get 4. But anyway, with the ridiculous pricing aside, what made him write in was that there's a description for this cable. And there's a whole section in there that says calibration information, which reads as follows. We quote, "Reference and Opus series cables require calibration to an owner's system. Any pre-owned Reference or Opus series cables will need to be recalibrated for the new owner so that the cable performs up to transparent specifications. Please allow 2 to 3 weeks for recalibration and delivery," end quote. So Joseph just wants to know why. What are they doing to a speaker wire to calibrate it to an owner's sound system? Any theories, Richard?
That's insane. So, I mean, it's speaker. It's literally copper at each end, right? We're not talking about some plug with chips in it that might have to be reset or anything.
Well, in transparent case, I think no, they're not the ones who put batteries in line. That was one other company, but they do put in what they call a crossover network inside. They do have proprietary. We don't really know what kind of chips are in this little box that's in line with this speaker cable. But so I mean, obviously, Joseph himself is not actually considering these things. He's doing a little bit of pointing and laughing.
It's just it's so absurd.
It's absolutely
crazy.
absurd. And I mean, the thing is, all you could do, because these are not adjustable inside of there, all you could do is attenuate the signal in some way. That's all you can do with passive components in line on a piece of wire. All you can do is attenuate some part of the signal. Now, you could put in something there to attenuate lower frequencies and not higher frequencies. You could do something to attenuate higher frequencies and not lower frequencies. But that means you're creating a passive equalizer. That's what you're doing. I mean, I guess that's what they're calibrating the system for. Somebody who says, I want more highs than bass. Well, we'll attenuate the bass. That's all they could possibly do.
That's crazy.
Good times. Well, last up, and this will be our last question for this week. All the questions that were new for this week, Tom and I will answer them together, and we'll most likely have 2 podcasts at some point because we'll have a big backlog. But Alvin C wrote to us last week, and we'll answer him today. Alvin got the new Onkyo RZ730 receiver. We suggested that to him, and he wanted to have the full 7.1.4 Atmos experience for the lowest price possible. This wasn't the very lowest price one, but it's the one that he got as the full set of pre-outs. So he was hoping that maybe Tom and I were wrong when we described this, that maybe there's a way to have the Onkyo power everything except for the front, left, and right speakers. He's got 9 amps built in. He wants 11 speakers. Could he say, power the front, left, right speakers, the ones that use the most power those externally, power everything else internally? But unfortunately, we were correct, and the surround back speakers must always be powered by the external amp if you're running 11 speakers. There's no way you can change that. So he got the RZ730 so that he'd have a full set of pre-outs, and there's nothing stopping him from adding more external amps, so he can power his front, left, right speakers externally, but those surround backs will always have to be powered externally. That's his first world problem description of that. But
yeah, I mean, I have the same problem with my receiver, right? Like if I want to have the full the full spectrum, then I have to get the additional amplifier. Mm-hmm. And someday I'll probably do that, but for now I'm just living without it.
Well, he followed our advice when it comes to speakers, and he's continuing to use the clip speakers that he already owns. He put his quintet little satellites, using those as his front height and rear height Atmos speakers. And then he the included wall mounts for those made it an easy installation for him, and he wanted to notice them more, so he turned up their trim levels. So he's like, well, maybe Rob is right, and once he gets used to them, he'll notice them if he takes them away. But so far, his experience with Atmos has been more in line with Tom's, which is meh. So that's his take on Atmos for the moment. I know, Richard, you're a fan of Atmos. You like it more than meh.
Yeah, it dramatically depends on the content. Yeah. You know, the things that I have found probably most interesting and best enveloping are things like concert discs. Mm-hmm. As opposed to just general movies, because general movies don't have enough going on like directly above you and everything that you're really going to benefit from that. Mm-hmm. But when you get a concert disc and they're recreating the experience that you would have in a concert hall, it is, in my opinion, it's phenomenal.
Well, you might be interested in that podcast where they talk about mastering music for Atmos. So that all ties together nicely. So getting into Alvin's questions, with his room size and layout, he's actually using a second pair of towers as his side surround speakers, but they physically need to be a little bit behind his seats because there's just no room to put them directly 90 degrees to the sides. So he noticed that when he does some panning tests, circling tests of sounds just going around, he can hear a slight gap between his front towers and his side surrounds. He's just noticed that that's there. So he's got another pair of bookshelf speakers that aren't being used at the moment. So there's no way that he can put the towers directly to sides, but he might be able to just fit the second pair of bookshelf speakers to the sides. They'd be very close to his side seats, and he'd need to convince his wife that making yet one more change in this theater is going to be entirely worth it. So should he do it, or should he just live with the way things are?
Yeah, well, and the other problem to think about there is that to do it properly, you really need them. You don't want them right at the ceiling like I have mine.
Not at the ceiling,
I didn't want mine. Mine aren't in the ceiling, but mine are kind of right just at that ceiling level so that they're not in view and they don't look like they're sticking out of the wall. Yeah. With his setup, with pictures that he has, it's going to look like, it's almost like you're going to run into them when you're going around the sofa.
Yeah.
And I don't know how well that's going to go over with the rest of the family.
No, I mean, my thing is, if there were a way to elevate them just a little bit, because strangely, when you elevate the surround speakers, you do get a little bit more of that enveloping, more ambient sound to them, because you're not getting that direct sound straight into your ear, and it's not quite as pinpoint. Oh, the sound was coming from in front, and now it's definitely coming from slightly behind me. It mushes a little bit more if you elevate them. So I mean, even towers, if there's some way you can just elevate them on some kind of makeshift stand, heck, it might be cinder blocks for all we know. If you can elevate them a little bit, I think that might help, and you might be able to get away with that without even having to ask for permission or forgiveness. But to finish up, he's got two subwoofers like we're always talking about. He's got one Paradigm PS1000 and a Paradigm PS 1200, 1200. So at one point he had them in diagonally opposite corners like we talk about, but they temporarily got stacked when he had a Christmas tree taking up one of the back corners. And so ever since then, they just sort of remained stacked in the front right corner up there. So the room itself is 12 feet by 15 feet by 8 feet, but it does have an opening on the right-hand side that goes into the kitchen. So he's got these stacked paradigms, and they seem to do a great job as they are right now output-wise. He isn't sure if he has like the full pressurization that we talk about, but they can certainly make his couch shake, so he's getting tactile. The volume is not a problem. That said, if he does play a frequency sweep, they obviously roll off below 25 hertz. So they play real nice down to 25, then they drop off. He's got his fear of missing out, that he's like, am I missing so much below 25 hertz? And if so, would it be worthwhile selling his two paradigms and getting a pair of SVS PB1000 subwoofers instead? Any thoughts, Richard?
No, I have no experience
That's
with this
not
whatsoever.
yours?
This is your domain.
So, I mean, first of all, the diagonally opposite corner placement that you're talking about isn't truly diagonally opposite corners of the space as a whole, because you have this opening into the kitchen. So that has to be considered part of the acoustic space. Anywhere the air can move, it will move. It doesn't know that you've got a designated theater area. So you're not necessarily going to get the mathematical uniformity of bass sound waves in this room just having them in diagonally opposite corners. However, having the two subwoofers spread apart across the room will definitely net you more uniform bass with some adjustment to the phase knob versus having them stacked. But he's already aware of that. That's not really the consideration. I would say to you that, I mean, Tom and I always talk about, we love a sub that can at least play nice and linearly down to 20 hertz, because when the stuff below 25 hertz plays, and you're thinking, from 20 to 25 hertz, is that really anything? Well, I mean, from 20 hertz to 40 hertz is an octave. So from 20 hertz to 25 hertz is a quarter of an octave, if you're thinking of it that way. It's more than just the numerical value might make you think, because doubling a frequency is by definition an octave. So way down in the bass, small numerical values still mean a fairly sizable portion of the audible frequency range. I mean, yeah, we'd love you to be able to have nice linear response all the way down to 20 hertz, but to do that with your opening to the kitchen, I don't think PB1000s are actually going to get you there. That's the issue I have with this, and it means spending, 2000 series money or going over to another manufacturer like Power Sound Audio or HSU or someone like that. and that means physically larger subs as well. That, I mean, you were talking about moving your surround speakers means having to have a discussion with your wife. Think about what even larger subwoofers to play a quarter of an octave is going to mean. In all good conscience, Alvin, I can't tell you that I really think you ought to do this. You don't need it for the output, the raw output necessarily, but to make 20 hertz play at the full, I can really hear and feel it level, you have to consider the whole space. There's no way around it. Those sound waves are 55 feet long. So yeah, I'm trepidatious about that, Alvin. I'm not gonna, you can't blame me. If you do it, I'm not gonna take the onus on that one.
Well, the other thing that I feel, and I mean, you may have a different opinion about this, but from the pictures that he sent us, I get the feeling that this room is not necessarily a fully dedicated space.
Right. It's a living room that is also a theater. Yeah.
Right. And so I almost feel like that sort of investment, that change in equipment investment, isn't necessarily well suited to this space while this is where your theater is.
I can agree with that quite easily. So, yep, there we go. We're going to stop it there because I'm tired. And Richard has got to go.
Indeed.
And we've hit the 2-hour mark and then some. So that is AVRant for this week. Now, I'll try to quickly mention all these names. We got a pile of them, but I'll try to run through them here. Rusty R, Stefan B, Infinite Gary, of course, Infinite Gary is back. Brandon N, Brandon G, John Z, Anthony B. Let's see. That's a long question from Anthony B. There, got to do some scrolling here. J.A., Graham C, and Monty N. Is that everybody? Nope, there's one more down there, Michael R. All right, I've got you guys on the list. It's almost certainly going to have to be a double up episode with Tom when he gets back at some point. But everybody's questions will be answered because that's what we do here at AVRant. We answer your home theater and AV questions. To get your questions answered, you send them via email to question@avrant.com. That's all you got to do. So I'll thank our listeners of the week once again, which I don't know. We might have some PayPal donors. We'll mention your names next week when Tom is back. Thank you very much if you did. And patreon.com/AVRant podcast if you'd like to sign up for an automatic monthly donation. And thanks so much to our 83 patrons over there. And hugest thanks of all to Richard Gunther. Thank you for being my co-host this week, Richard.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Oh, happy to have you here. Definitely, we should not wait like 7 years for you to be back on this podcast again. That would be unacceptable. So let's let people know where they can reach you once again in case they'd like to get in touch with you, and I'm sure they will.
Sure. Once again, you can find the shows that I do and the writing that I do over at thedigitalmediazone.com. And you can find me on Twitter at Richard Gunther.
That is fantastic. Well, thank you so much for listening, everyone. On behalf of Tom Andry, this has been AVRant. I am Rob H.
And I am Richard Gunther.
Very good. Now, go out and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.